My name is Jill Bisajenski, and I'm the new director of the Center for Slavic and East European Studies, and I want to welcome you to this fascinating lecture. And our speaker today is Umut Korkut, who's currently a reader, which is the equivalent of associate professor at Glasgow School for Business and Society at Glasgow Caledonian University. Previously, he was a research fellow in the School for Politics and International Relations at the University College Dublin, and he completed his PhD at the Central European University in Budapest in 2004. In 2009, he was awarded associate professorship by the Turkish Higher Education Council. And since 2007, he has filled professional services and international roles for the Political Studies Association as a convener of the Comparative European Politics Specialist Group, and since 2016 as a trustee for the Executive Council of the PSA. During the academic year of 2015-16, last year, he was a visiting fellow in the Slavic Eurasian Research Center at Hokkaido University as part of a research group on interwar Eurasianism and Japan's involvement in international politics. His research interests include European politics with a specialization in Eastern European and Turkish politics, migration and forced migration with a focus on the East Mediterranean and Eastern Europe, and religion, gender, and politics. And he's currently writing a new monograph titled Politics and Gender Identity in Turkey, Centralized Islam for Socioeconomic Control. And this is under a contract with Routledge Press. Today, the title of his presentation is The Consolidation of Illiberal Politics in Hungary, Christianity, Anti-Modernism, Conservatism in Europe. Please give a warm welcome to Professor Korkut.
Hello. Good morning. Good morning. Thank you very much for kind words and good introduction, Professor Bistajinsky. Believe it or not, this is my second time in Columbus for the past 12 hours because my flight to Cincinnati was canceled last night, and I had to fly into Columbus, and I arrived America at 2 a.m. in the morning to start coming back to Columbus this morning again. So please bear with me if I really get lost while I'm giving my talk today. Well, many thanks again. I'm really, really glad to be here. I'm really glad to see the turnout as well. Hopefully you're going to like my talk as well. I came from Budapest yesterday. I was giving another talk over there about migration. In fact, I was in a very interesting panel. So I'm going to bring in some of the feedback that I've been hearing, that also some debates in Hungary on the migration issue into this talk as well. Now, the issue that I'm dealing here is practically how come in a country like Hungary, which had always been branded as the most developed, the most liberal communist country until the end of 1989, how come there's such a reversal of liberal European democratic polity? Why? What is going on in Hungary? How come a country which, according to the historical legacies, should have been the most pro-European country in Eastern Europe is becoming the most anti-European country in Eastern Europe, and in fact even looking towards East in order to qualify its regime? The reason why I'm asking these questions is that I studied in Hungary. I lived there for 7 years. They were the best years of my life. And I went there as a Turkish student who studied in Manchester in the United Kingdom before. And I learned the language, etc. And I've been always really impressed with how cultivated Hungarian nation is, especially the cultural scene, the theater scene in Budapest, music scene is spectacular. So you cannot really understand practically why such a cultivated nation, such a cultivated people would have such a bad government. So there's really this kind of practical discrepancy or disparity in terms of the cultivation and the refinement in the society and the whole political discourse. So for me, this is tremendously interesting as someone who is interested in the formation of the political discourse and how practically the politicians themselves, through discursive means, which I call discursive governance, can really affect the public sphere even without making any policies. So these are the theoretical themes that I'm bringing to my talk today, and I'm asking the question practically, Why is the political response to the worst crisis of European Union distinctly conservative and anti-modern? How do anti-modernism, illiberalism collaborate to offer an alternative course for European integration? And why do illiberal conservative politics prevail despite their subscription to neoliberal social policies? I suppose a lot of this would also reflect to the American context as well as to other European cases such as France, such as Poland, such as Russia, such as Turkey. So in my talk, I explore the development and consolidation of illiberal politics amidst the global crisis of neoliberalism and democracy after 2008. I concentrate on Hungary as it is the first illiberal democracy, in the words of Viktor Orban, in the European Union. However, the Hungarian illiberal democracy debates also resonate in the case of Poland, Slovakia, France, Turkey, and United States, recently especially. In this respect, I reflect on the anti-modern, Christian, and anti-humanitarian tendencies of illiberal democracy in Hungary and beyond. Hereby, what I mean by anti-humanitarian tendencies is anti-immigration voice in Hungary. Furthermore, while elaborating on illiberal criticisms to internationalism, I will pay a particular attention to how illiberal politics respond to migration from and democracy exportation to Middle East and North Africa in Europe. So rather than taking general illiberal conservative tendencies for granted as EU skeptic, we need to elaborate on the future course of European integration in view of the clash between its liberal and conservative conceptualizations, which is becoming extremely clear. The division in the European Union is becoming very, very clear across very polarized liberal voices, which for Orban are the Central European, conservative voices, which according to Orban is the Central Europe, and liberal voices, which according to Orban once again is the countries represented by Germany. Hence, this study follows a puzzle as to how come conservative politics succeed despite their neoliberal economic policies causing poverty and inequality, while liberal Democrats lose power due to their subscription to neoliberal economic policies, paving the way to similar economic inequalities and poverty. So while there is an economic convergence in terms of the conservatives and the liberals, I'm using liberal term here for Europe, not necessarily, maybe it doesn't translate all that well to the American context. How come they really converge in terms of economic policies, but nonetheless one part gets an upper hand in terms of its political orientation, whereas the others are losing more and more? So in response to this puzzle, first I'd like to delineate the mechanisms of alternative democracy, alternative economy, alternative European integration that illiberal politics are proposing. And second, I'd like to illustrate particular identity politics and alternative realities constructed by the illiberal conservative right. Arguably, these two processes contribute to the success of illiberalism, even if the latter fails to cure the economic woes of the masses in the aftermath of the global economic crisis. The ongoing fusion of social and economic status under liberalization gave those less financially successful a feeling of being deprived of both social and economic well-being, right? Still, the economic regimes that illiberal conservatives seek to establish also prioritize middle classes, the heterosexual families that belong to ethnic majorities. Identity politics and an imagined grandeur, sometimes in the shape of white supremacism, that illiberalism promotes, eventually conceal the economic disadvantages that the very system also brings forth. So in a way, the grandeur that's constructed around the alternative politics is concealing the economic disadvantages that the very system is also bringing forth. So let me explain now how illiberalism materializes and then discuss how political conditions amenable to the establishment of illiberalism unfold. This is what I call as alternative democracy, alternative economy, and alternative economic integration. Narrow economistic, technocratic variant of liberalism merged with Europhile elitism has been detrimental to the quality of democracy and the process of European integration. This is what we saw until 2008 and the crisis that we've been witnessing since then. In turn, illiberalism took hold in the absence of genuinely liberal political platforms. The capture of pro-European politics by Ersatz's liberalism inhibited also the formation of the liberal counter-publics, which could and should act as agents of the long-term cultural and identity change necessary for any progress towards a fully liberal democracy. I don't believe that actually, even in Europe, we really achieved full liberal democracy yet. Illiberal politics originated from criticism directed to its liberal opponent for the ample freedom of expression that it provides for the liberal voices, while quietening all illiberal dissent by allegations of hate speech and racism. This is very common in terms of Jobbik voices in Hungary, for example, stating that whatever we say is branded as anti-freedom of expression, whereas the liberals, they can say everything and they can attack our cultural values. So where is democracy here? And this is practically the very start of the discussion or disagreement on freedom of expression in Europe. Anti-modern illiberal politicians argued that the liberals expect their consent to a process that undermines their national traditions and well-being. Alongside, there is a fierce discussion on the topic of Europe in illiberal Europe, as domestic politics is no longer insulated from European politics, and European politics is no longer insulated from domestic politics. Previously, we used to see Euroscepticism or Euro-reject practically being against Europe as a polity or European integration as a process. But more and more now, what we're seeing is that each and every little policy that European Union is proposing is being taken for domestic debates. In Britain especially, all the way from fisheries policy, transport policy, and in the case of Hungary, as we're going to see with the upcoming referendum on 2nd of October, it is very much the immigration policy. So now, Europe as such has become a lot more contentious than what it used to be. Even if illiberal politicians raise allegations about the EU that it is essentially undemocratic and unaccountable, accountability in the illiberal system is also feeble, and at its best only extended to illiberal voters rather than the public per se. Illiberal regimes take economic contribution rather than residence and citizenship as the essence of inclusion to polity and to the community. And that's why we've been seeing all the welfare regime changes in Hungary and practically promoting the middle class family as the only one worthy of citizenship or being included into the community, as against those degenerate, gypsies, immigrants, people who are out of labor force, to a certain extent, the disabled, etc. So this, in the end, the community that the illiberals...
Are you saying the others don't have to vote?
No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that this is what the illiberals are constructing as the community. But in the case of Hungary,
I don't know where you got that from.
Why?
I don't know where you have that information from.
Well, if you follow the Hungarian politics and if you see the presentation of middle class as the depiction of how Hungarians should be like, you really see that it is quite exclusive.
Okay, I don't want to stop you, but I don't see any difference between that and everybody, both candidates, saying the middle class is what suffers here.
Well, in America it may be different.
Well,
Yeah,
okay,
I mean, in America, in America it may be different. Hence, the community is limited despite attention to communitarianism as an essential of illiberal politics. In the words of Gyula Teller, one of the key ideologues of Fidesz in Hungary, those who belong to the community are the productive ones who are upwardly mobile rather than the foreign-minded or unproductive ones that are on welfare assistance. In the absence of rule of law, the illiberal system entrusts the survival of the community in the personality of the leader who stands to represent the order, law, will, and direction. Thereby, illiberal politics make the community and the community sustains the leader. And this had been the very gist of the executive politics in Hungary. As a result, illiberal politics not only undercut the rights of residents and citizens, but also undermine the importance of market economy, democracy, as well as the importance of rule of law in the eyes of the citizens. The development of illiberal politics in Hungary dates from the global economic crisis in 2008 and the following public insecurity amidst the failure of left liberal governments to alleviate the effects of this crisis. So Fidesz came into power in 2010. I think we're all familiar with the events since then. A very conservative reconceptualization of democracy and public policy accompanied the Fidesz regime, and that turned the country into a guided democracy, with curtailed judicial and decreasing legislative control of the executive and ascending control of Fidesz over public life, particularly in terms of media. A new constitution, electoral system, and new electoral districts, overhaul of the tax regime, workfare, appropriation of energy sector by the state, and the general anti-Western stance accompanied these political changes. We've seen the repercussions of Hungarian developments in case of Poland and Turkey. At the moment, Orban is the leader of, in his words, the most unified nation in Europe, which after the 2014 parliamentary election in Hungary, which gave Fidesz initially with 2/3 majority once again in the parliament. Since then, Fidesz lost this. The government-controlled media in Hungary relentlessly present Orban as the most successful politician in Europe. Orban, meanwhile, promises to institutionalize an illiberal state in Hungary in order for the country to manage a post-2008 crisis world where, in his words once again, anything became possible. While alluding to the success of illiberal, perhaps non-democratic countries such as Singapore, China, India, Russia, and Turkey as stars in international economic performance. Emphasizing the achievements of illiberal countries, Orban believes that in order for Hungary to prosper in the race for the global competitiveness, it should explore ways to tear itself away from the dogmas and ideologies of Western Europe, such as liberalism. Very recently, Orban also started to yearn for Trump and his candidacy in America as, once again, much better than Hillary Clinton's presidency. He's not alone with this, by the way. Geert Wilders, Dutch politicians, they also quite influenced by Trump. The essential economic element of illiberal polity in this instance is a type of workfare state whereby one's rights and obligations to the state are determined by one's economic service and contribution to the nation and national economy. Thereby, the economic argument of illiberalism goes beyond the ethnic identity component in Holmes' work, 1989, which stated that integralism as a counterweight to modernization thesis. Beyond the nation-state for European economic competitiveness, Orban's illiberalism prescribes value-generating work and families, and thereby diverges from liberalism with its emphasis on common good and the Christian culture. In effective economy, this system implies ad hoc decisions at an unqualified low level of economic legislation. It is anti-internationalist to an extent that it is careless about the economic aptitude of the country. Global economic changes, the requirements of international and national economic collaboration, along with the rule of law, harmonization of stability and accountability, fiscal, monetary, and income policy. What takes hold eventually is very populist and voluntarist economic steps which support a patriotic economic policy that appeals to the hearts of the community, to national interests and sovereignty, and the defense of families and communities against continuously constructed enemy, which is most of the time, West. Yes.
Can you repeat that, please? I didn't follow.
So what takes hold in the end is a very populist and voluntarist economic steps which supports a patriotic economic policy that appeals to the hearts of the community, to national interest and sovereignty, and the defense of families and the communities against, most of the time, Western capital. Whereas it is very comfortable with Chinese capital or Russian capital getting into the country or investing. In the end, in Hungary, according to Békesség 2014, economic enterprise goes hand in hand with political enterprise. This is thanks to Fidesz's first knocking off the internal and external control mechanisms of economic policy, and second, justification of economic policy with alibi concepts such as Hungary will become the center of industrial, agricultural, and building production and output. We've consolidated Hungarian economy on many pillars and decreased its dependence and defenselessness. Vindication of protectionism in order to cultivate or generate national capital and enterprises, and strengthening of middle class and supporting families. These are very common slogans when you read Fidesz politicians or Orban's speeches. But once again, I don't believe that Orban is alone in this thing. I'm just stating here that Orban practically set the course of the development of illiberal politics. This inclination towards generating realities alternative to the existing economic and political circumstances, as well as circulation of myths about the past, present, and the future, are essential elements of illiberal systems. The current sui generis economic system of Fidesz is defensive, given its aspirations to bolster the national bourgeoisie as a reaction to the allegedly exploitative international capital, and more hybrid in character with its peculiar balance of etatism and acute welfare cuts. According to Voska 2014, this is a very, very weird type of economic policy whereby we see ultra neoliberalism is coming together with etatism in certain fields. Ultra neoliberalism practically meaning the cutting of welfare assistance to the needy, to the poor, introducing flat tax regime and decreasing taxes on the poor, on the rich, whereas increasing the taxes on the poor. In the end, illiberalism in Hungary neither accepts a neoliberal nor a welfare state, but pursues another route. It suggests a neoliberal, ultra-liberal turn in tax and social policy, while remaining paternalist in the issue of decreasing utility costs, such as energy, water charges for families, but aggressively aspires to spread the state ownership over the economy, especially in the distribution of utility products and energy companies. The system leads to a perverse income distribution that divides the nation into two, with one increasingly crowding group of people in hopeless situations living in penury due to policy changes in the tax regime and welfare assistance. Just to wrap up this part, the illiberal economic systems pursue national entrepreneurialism to cater for economic development. They consider pious, middle-class, young, ethnically homogeneous, and heterosexual publics as fundamentals of economic transformation from liberalism to illiberalism. Their priority then is not improving liberties of those that fall outside illiberal constituencies or improving capabilities of those in need, but exclude them in order to appropriate more wealth for the new middle class. Just to shift to identity and alternative realities here, we need to have practically a certain shape of grandeur in order to conceal all the economic similarities here, similarities to neoliberalism. So in order to conceal their overt economic similarities to neoliberalism and hence failures with providing prosperity and enhancing capabilities, the illiberal regimes instigate alternative realities. These derive from arrogant middle-class grandeur, nationalism against internationalism, and wishful, safe, and stable island mentalities in geographies allegedly full of fear, uncertainties, and insecurity. If you actually, I don't know whether you've been following the Hungarian Orban's speech once again last summer, he talks more and more on the immigration issue and the fact that Central Europe or Visegrad countries themselves, they represent the only safe, the secure haven in a Europe which seems to be collapsing. And he's presenting practically Central Europe once again as the only safe haven for countries, especially for Christian families. And in a way, I believe that this is a way to conceal the economic similarities that the regime has with its neoliberal predecessor. According to the Hungarian Prime Minister, Central Europe presents a beacon of stability and a spot of security where insecurity rules. This is also the only place where the elites listen to people. It maintains booming economies, keeps young families at work, hosts governments concerned with family and demographic policies, and states in charge of protecting their borders from irregular, that is, in quote, illegal refugees. In return, according to Orban, Brussels occupies itself too much with taking away national sovereignty to idealize Europe and turns Europeanization into a closed notion or overly ideologized system. This type of Europeanization, according to Orban, tries to make Hungarianness or Polishness or Christianity unfashionable while promoting a multi-ethnic identity. Anti-internationalism of illiberalism manifests also an anti-modernist essence, namely its rejection of the Renaissance tradition of freedom and the existentialist and spiritual independence of citizens under the guise of its opposition to free market capitalism. In their stead, illiberalism offers a deep search for morality. In making of illiberal moral politics, governmentality as governance through intermediary disciplinary institutions and self-governance provides the element. In these cases, we come across a hybrid form of governmentality that combines neoliberalism with illiberal logics, especially in relation to the making of alternative identities. The expression of these alternative identities would be urban spaces, for example, theater, novels, cultural output, songs, rock music, for example, or more and more different types of clothing styles in Hungary, which is yearning to a mythic reality, which apparently was taking place in Central Asia thousands of years ago, and bringing them into the community, bringing back them into society as if they happened, and as if this was the only time when Hungary was safe and Hungarians was prosperous. If you travel in Hungary, you would see these type of stores opening at every little corner, which is even adopting the runic alphabet to replace the Latin alphabet, and etc. Illiberalism sets as its aim a society with principles of conservative community instead of neoliberalism resting on individualism. This is once again taken from an interview with Tadler Gyula. He is the main ideologue of Viktor Orban. Hence, the illiberal conservative right proposes more traditional, religious, patriarchal, communitarian values vis-à-vis the individualism that allegedly the West represents. This consideration separates the West from Europe, and in so much as they scorn the former, the West, the illiberals argue that they can transform the latter, Europe, with the help of the national and Christian values. So practically the implication here is that West has failed and Europe can survive if it adopts the Central European illiberal habits. Hence, the true Europeans remain the Central Europeans, while the rest represents a failed identity. So while West represents a failed identity, Europe continues in the shape of Central Europe. A vigorous process of making alternative realities and identities is at play in illiberal politics. Departing from the new social movements literature, we can discuss mechanisms of creation of this identity. My argument hereby is that culture, everyday life, identity formation, and habits might not only be resources, instruments, and aspects of society, but the very focus of the movement of activity itself. These mechanisms draw attention to everyday practices as a site of contention, and it is actually within the everyday practices that illiberalism infiltrates in terms of, theater, in terms of cultural output, in terms of music style, etc., even clothing. Eventually, their hegemonic mobilization becomes formative of actors. So while the illiberal politics are mobilizing the society across its alternative realities, it is also formulating the actors, the mentalities, and this is what governmentality is about. According to New Social Movements framework, the most important resources are those that allow the movements to institutionalize alternative daily routines. I suggest that these theoretical inferences refer to the formulation of alternative realities and myths within illiberal polities. In Hungary, this has been explicitly against EU-induced Europeanization. This doesn't mean that Hungary opposes Europeanization, obviously. Orban is very much pro-Europeanization as long as it follows Fidesz style of Europe. Also in Hungary, resentment to the West operates hand in hand with the framing of Hungary's past and the parallel mythical construction of the East, either as a homeland in a faraway lands or as a space that had hosted the true Hungarianness. This has become more manifest since the beginning of the global financial crisis in 2008. This resentment has not been merely towards the West as a geography, but also to those that subscribe to Western progressive ideals. As an alternative, the nationalist and conservative right has proposed more traditional religious patriarchal values vis-à-vis the individualism that the liberal West has represented. While at times they responded to Westernization with Europeanization imbued with Hungarianness, at other times they totally rejected the West and went as far as propagating a Turanian or an Eastern alternative for Hungary. To this extent, they pursued symbolic creations to manipulate social relationships, social representation, and collective memory. On the one hand, they've generated images of a new past to produce a stock of common knowledge and information that people share in the form of common sense to arm themselves with a new identity and discursive tools against those of their liberal and westernized opponents. On the other, much recently, the creation of a new past through fictitious and not empirically grounded means has served for economization of social and political relations. I'm finishing soon. Therefore, the new past is social construction mainly, if not wholly, shaped by the concerns of the present. It propagates images and symbolic constructions of the past to serve the current political goals and alternative realities and general myths. To articulate the past historically does not mean to recognize it the way it really was. It means to seize hold of a memory as it flashes up at a moment of danger. And I believe the Eastern Turn in Hungary is practically this kind of mythical creation which does not really rest on any empirically grounded facts.
Eastern what?
Eastern Turn towards the Turanianism.
Eastern turn.
To that extent, the political elite also embeds economization of social and political relations into illiberalism and aims to redefine the current civic and private spheres as the much exalted centers of power of the recent neoliberal governmentalities. Eventually, in so much as their transformation of the collective memory of the past succeeds, the illiberal ideology can contravene the earlier influence of liberalism and establish its own hegemonic neoliberalism. Overall, in its concentration on and conceptualization of how illiberal regimes make alternative democracy, economy, and European integration and identity claims, my idea here departs from ongoing discussion in literature in view of the ascendance of conservatism merely as anti-establishment political process in the United States, Horvitz 2013, competitive authoritarianism in Turkey as well as Thailand and Hungary, in other words, that reflects on economic irregularities. My study here relates to the studies of New Right, adopting illiberal democracy in France, for example, and conservative Christian right transforming into illiberal democrats in Poland, Friedman 2016. Moreover, it delves more into discussing alternative realities that illiberalism suggests and the alternatives it promises to deliver to cater for the economic failure to enhance the capabilities of the general public. That's why the continuous making of new collective identities and alternative realities is central to the continued success of political illiberalism despite its economic failures. In summary, here I've elaborated on illiberal transformation not as a rejection of the idea of Europeanization and democracy per se, but instead offering a new understanding of how illiberalism reconcile anti-modernism with their domestic and international goals. Indeed, illiberal regimes have problems of democracy, freedom of expression, media freedom, deficits in government tolerance for opposition, pluralism, etc. Yet, what matters is how illiberal democracies justify their deficits in view of alternative conservative goals. In this attempt, they also conceal their failure with extending prosperity and enhancing capability of publics with the imagined illiberal system alternative to the Western liberal one. Thank you very much.